The Mustang Mare couldn't save her foal. See who come for help. The air is thick with the roar of a raging river, its currents so strong they seem to swallow everything in their path. On the edge of the water, a foal, no more than a few days old, fights for his life. His tiny legs flail helplessly, struggling against the merciless pull of the rushing water. His desperate cries echo through the wilderness, but no one is near enough to hear. In the distance, Sierra, his mother, stands frozen, paralyzed with fear, watching her newborn being dragged away by the furious current. The foal, gasping for air, barely stays above the surface. His frail body shudders as the water surges over him, pushing him further away from safety. Every second feels like an eternity. Is this it? Will the river claim another innocent life today? A rush of terror strikes Sierra's heart as she watches her baby disappear under the dark, swirling waters. Hope seems to fade, but then, just as all seems lost, something miraculous happens. Will the foal survive against the odds? Or will this be a heartbreaking tragedy no one could have foreseen? The sound of rushing water roared in Sierra's ears, drowning out everything else around her. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing like a thunderclap as she stared desperately at the foal struggling against the relentless current. The small creature was helpless against the power of the river, and Sierra's breath caught in her throat as she watched her baby struggle, his tiny legs thrashing in the water. Sierra had given birth to him just weeks before, and already the bond between them was unbreakable. She had cared for him, watched him grow stronger each day, and now he was fighting for his life. The harsh reality of nature was inescapable. She knew the river was a powerful force, capable of sweeping anything away in its deadly embrace. Yet, all that mattered now was getting to her foal before it was too late. The water was deeper than it had ever been before, swollen by the storms that had ravaged the mountainside for days. The rain hadn't stopped, and the river had risen dangerously, its currents fast and unforgiving. Sierra's hooves dug into the soft mud, slipping beneath her as she tried to take a step forward. She felt the cold chill of the water biting at her legs as she struggled to maintain her balance. She pushed forward with everything she had, each step a battle against the powerful pull of the river. Sierra could see her foal now, a little speck in the distance, barely visible through the murky water. She wanted to shout, to call to him, but there was no time. He was sinking fast, his body being swept further away with each passing second. The desperation in Sierra's heart rose with each frantic beat of her hooves. She had to get to him. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. Her instincts told her to turn back, to find higher ground and wait for the storm to pass. But she was a mother, and there was no way she could just stand by and watch her foal disappear into the current. She knew the river would take him. It was only a matter of time. But Sierra wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't. Not when her baby still had a fighting chance. With every ounce of strength, she pushed through the current. The river tried to claim her with every step, tugging at her legs, pulling her backward, but Sierra fought back with all her might. Her breathing was ragged, but her resolve never wavered. She couldn't let him go. As she fought against the water, she thought of the first time she saw him. The tiny foal who had stumbled to his feet for the first time and nuzzled her gently. The bond between them had been instant, and though he had only just begun to understand the world around him, Sierra knew she had to protect him with everything she had. The water surged higher, and Sierra felt herself slipping. Her hooves sank deeper into the mud, her body growing heavier with the weight of the water clinging to her fur. For a moment, her strength faltered. Could she do this? Was it too late? Her gaze locked onto the foal, still struggling against the river. He was barely visible now, only his faint outline visible in the chaotic surge of water. Tears welled in Sierra's eyes, and for the briefest of moments, she thought she might fail him. But then, her baby's cry reached her ears. A faint sound, but one filled with so much desperation. She knew he was still alive. He hadn't given up. He was fighting, and so was she. With renewed determination, Sierra lunged forward, pushing herself through the water, ignoring the sharp pain in her legs, the cold that numbed her muscles. Each step was harder than the last, but she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't stop. She had to keep going. The water was up to her chest now, and she could feel herself being pulled under with every step she took. But there was no turning back. Not when her foal needed her. She was close now, so close she could almost reach out and touch him. Her heart raced as she neared the spot where he was struggling, his tiny body barely holding onto consciousness. His eyes were wide with fear, his little body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. He was so small, so vulnerable, but Sierra could see the spark of life in him, the same determination she felt in her own chest. He hadn't given up, and neither would she. In one final, desperate burst of energy, Sierra pushed herself forward, her hooves barely finding purchase on the slippery rocks beneath her. She reached out, her muzzle brushing against the foal's damp coat, and with one final heave, she pulled him close. The current fought against them, trying to drag them both under, but Sierra held onto her foal with all her strength. The weight of the water pressed against them, but Sierra refused to let go. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she clung to him, refusing to let the river steal her baby away. She could feel his little body trembling beneath her, the fear and exhaustion weighing him down. But Sierra refused to let the water take him. She couldn't let him slip away. She wouldn't. With all the strength left in her, Sierra began to make her way back toward the shore, each step harder than the last. The river was still raging, but she was determined to keep moving forward. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when her baby was still clinging to life. The shore was getting closer now, the light of the sun just beginning to break through the dark clouds above. Sierra's strength was nearly gone, but she could feel the ground beneath her hooves firming up. She was almost there. When they finally reached the shore, Sierra collapsed, exhausted but relieved, her foal still safe in her arms. The journey had nearly taken everything from her, but she had done it. She had saved her baby, and in that moment, Sierra knew she would do anything, face any storm, to protect the one she loved. The storm had been raging for hours. The wind howled through the trees, the rain lashed against the ground in torrents, and the river had become a wild, untamed beast, sweeping everything in its path. Sierra, soaked to the bone and exhausted beyond belief, had almost given up. She had done everything in her power to save her foal, but the battle was taking its toll. Her legs were trembling, her muscles burning, and the fear that had gripped her heart was starting to make her feel powerless. Her foal, still weak and shivering, had barely clung to her as she made her way back to the shore. He was no longer fighting the current, too exhausted to do anything but follow her lead. Sierra felt the weight of the situation. She had fought so hard to get him back to safety, but the storm had shown no signs of letting up. The river was still furious, and there was no way to know how long it would take for the water to recede. With a sigh, Sierra lowered herself onto the muddy ground, her foal resting beside her. She nuzzled him gently, trying to comfort him, but she couldn't shake the dread that had settled in her chest. They were both so tired, too tired to go any further. She could feel herself slipping into a daze, the exhaustion threatening to take over. Just when Sierra thought she couldn't continue any longer, a distant sound reached her ears, a faint sound that barely cut through the howling wind. It was a voice, and it didn't belong to her. She raised her head, squinting through the storm. Was she imagining it? Had her desperation made her hear things? The voice came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding against the earth. Sierra's heart leaped into her chest. Was it help? Was someone finally coming to save them? She barely had the strength to stand, but she forced herself to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. She couldn't see anything through the storm, but she knew someone was coming. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the chaos of the storm. A man riding a horse, moving with incredible speed. The rider seemed unaffected by the heavy rain, the wind, or the wild conditions around him. His horse was strong and determined, charging through the mud and water like it was nothing. It was Lucas, Lucas had always been a bit of a mystery to the locals. He was a loner, someone who kept to himself. No one knew much about him, except that he had a deep connection to the land and the animals around him. Some even said he had a special way with horses, as if he could communicate with them in a way no one else could. Sierra could barely believe her eyes as Lucas and his horse made their way toward her. She had heard stories about him, but never imagined she would see him in a moment like this. Lucas's face was focused, determined, and calm, even in the midst of the chaos that surrounded them. He didn't hesitate for a moment as he spotted Sierra and her foal. "Hold on," he called to her, his voice steady despite the storm's fury. "I'm coming." Sierra couldn't find her voice at first. She was too overwhelmed by the sight of this stranger, this man who had appeared out of nowhere, so calm in the midst of disaster. The storm had been relentless, and yet here he was, riding like he had done this 1,000 times before. His presence seemed almost surreal, like he was a figure from a dream. Lucas reached them in moments, his horse coming to a halt with a precision that stunned Sierra. Without a word, he dismounted and knelt beside Sierra and the foal. The storm raged on, but Lucas was steady, unfazed by the howling wind or the driving rain. He quickly assessed the situation, glancing at Sierra with a look that told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't here to waste time, he was here to act. "Let's get him out of here," Lucas said, his tone firm yet reassuring. Sierra barely had the energy to process his words, but she trusted him instinctively. There was something about his calm presence that made her feel safe, even in the most dangerous of circumstances. Lucas moved quickly, gently lifting the foal into his arms. It was clear he had done this before. His movements were smooth and controlled, as though he knew exactly how to handle a situation like this. He turned to Sierra, his expression softening. "We're going to get you both to safety," he promised. Sierra could only nod, too weak to say anything. Her heart was filled with gratitude and relief, but she still couldn't quite understand how this had happened. She had been alone, struggling to save her foal, and now here was a man, an unexpected hero, offering her a way out. Lucas mounted his horse, taking the foal with him. Without missing a beat, he extended his hand to Sierra, helping her onto the horse behind him. For a moment, Sierra hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to trust anyone else, especially not after everything she had been through. But something in Lucas's eyes made her believe that this was the right decision. She climbed onto the horse, wrapping her arms around his waist as they began to move. The journey back to safety was not easy. The storm was still relentless, and the floodwaters had only risen higher. Every step they took seemed to be a battle against the elements, but Lucas was undeterred. He guided his horse through the flooded terrain, moving with remarkable precision, as if he had been trained for moments like these. Sierra held on tightly, her foal safe in Lucas's arms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. It wasn't long before they reached higher ground, where the waters had begun to calm. The storm was still present, but the danger had passed. Sierra couldn't believe it. After everything she had gone through, she was safe, and so was her foal. Lucas finally stopped his horse, allowing them both to catch their breath. Sierra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely enough to express the depth of her gratitude. Lucas only nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was nothing," he said, his voice quiet but steady. In that moment, Sierra realized that Lucas was exactly the kind of person who didn't seek recognition. He didn't need praise or thanks. He simply did what needed to be done. And for that, Sierra would forever be grateful. The night had settled into an eerie quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of stillness that felt almost unnatural. The world was drenched, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. But in that strange peace, Sierra found a moment of solace. Her foal, though weak and shivering, was safe beside her. She could feel the warmth of his small body, his fragile frame leaning against hers as he rested. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, they had been fighting against nature's fury, struggling for survival. But now, they were here on solid ground, no longer at the mercy of the relentless storm. Sierra glanced around, her eyes drinking in the quiet surroundings, the darkness broken only by the faint light of the moon. She could hardly believe that they had made it. Every muscle in her body screamed in exhaustion, but her heart was lighter than it had been in hours. She finally had a chance to breathe, to process what had happened, and what Lucas had done for them. Her foal stirred beside her, his soft breaths filling the silence, and Sierra's gaze softened as she looked down at him. His wide brown eyes met hers, and for the first time that night, she saw a spark of hope in them, something that hadn't been there before. A sense of relief washed over her as she realized they were no longer in danger. With trembling hands, Sierra reached out and gently stroked her foal's damp coat. Her fingers traced his tiny form as if she were grounding herself to this moment of safety. She had almost lost him. The thought made her chest tighten with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Her mind replayed the chaotic moments in the storm, the terror, the desperation she had felt as the river tried to claim her foal. But then Lucas. She had been ready to give up, to surrender to the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Yet, just as she felt her strength faltering, he had appeared like an angel sent from nowhere, quiet, focused, and determined. Lucas's calm presence had been the lifeline they so desperately needed. The way he had taken charge of the situation without hesitation, the way he had scooped up her foal without a second thought, had made all the difference. Sierra hadn't realized how much she had been holding in, how much fear and anxiety had been bottled up inside of her, until the moment they had reached safety. Now, in the aftermath, those emotions came rushing to the surface, uninvited but unstoppable. She felt a wave of tears rise in her chest, threatening to spill over. It wasn't just the relief of knowing they were safe. It was everything. The fear, the trauma, the pain of almost losing her foal, and the overwhelming gratitude that had taken hold of her. Sierra's hands shook as she wiped the tears from her face, her chest tight with emotion. She had been holding on to the tension of the situation for so long, and now, in this quiet moment of safety, it all came crashing down. She let herself cry, not from weakness, but from the relief of finally finding peace. She hadn't realized how much she needed it, how much she needed to release everything that had built up inside of her over the past hours. Her foal nudged her gently with his nose, as if sensing her emotions. The tiny gesture was enough to pull her back to the present moment. She leaned down and whispered softly to him, "We made it, little one. You're safe now. We're both safe." It was then that she realized just how far they had come, from the fear and chaos of the storm to this quiet, healing moment of relief. Her journey hadn't been just about saving her foal. It had been about saving herself too. The connection they shared, the bond that had only strengthened in their struggle to survive, was something that couldn't be broken. And just then, Sierra realized that this was the turning point, the moment where her fear and exhaustion finally gave way to something deeper: gratitude, love, and a renewed sense of strength. In the face of the most intense adversity, she had fought for her foal, and she had won. And now, as she looked at him, she knew that they would be okay. No matter what came next, they would face it together. Sierra turned her gaze to Lucas, who was standing a few feet away, his horse calmly grazing in the distance. For a moment, their eyes met, and Sierra felt something stir inside her. A recognition of the bond that had formed between them, even in such a short time. Without saying a word, Sierra walked over to him, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but sincere. Lucas had saved her. He had saved her foal. He had given them both a chance at life. Lucas gave her a small, reassuring smile, his face softened by the night's events. "It's nothing," he replied, his voice as steady as always. "I'm just glad I could help." But Sierra knew that it was so much more than that. Lucas had been the one to pull them out of the darkness. His calm, unwavering presence had been the anchor they both needed in a sea of chaos. He had been their unexpected hero, and for that Sierra would never forget him. As the night grew deeper, Sierra and Lucas stood in silence, watching the stars slowly begin to emerge from behind the clouds. There was a sense of peace in the air now, a peace that felt like the calm after the storm. Sierra took a deep breath, looking at her foal, now resting soundly at her side. She knew they still had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time she felt certain that they would make it. Whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger, braver, and with a heart full of gratitude for the unexpected hero who had changed everything. The days that followed the storm were a blur of gentle care and small, significant victories. Sierra had spent the first few hours after the chaos trying to process everything that had happened, but now, in the quiet recovery, she was starting to notice the transformation taking place in her foal. Shadow, the little foal who had been moments away from losing his life, was showing signs of strength, and Sierra couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the fragile creature who had somehow made it through the worst of it. Each day, Shadow grew stronger, his little legs gaining steadiness with every step. Sierra watched him closely, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and amazement. She remembered how weak he had been when she first found him, how every breath seemed labored, how the weight of the storm had almost broken them both. But now the foal was finding his footing. He was trying to stand on his own, lifting himself up with newfound determination. His wobbly legs were starting to find a rhythm, his steps slowly becoming more confident. Sierra spent her days by his side, never far from him, always ready to step in if he faltered. She could see the spark in his eyes now, a glimmer of hope that had been absent when they first arrived at the safe place. It was in those moments, when she watched him struggling yet pressing on, that Sierra felt a deep connection to the foal, a bond that went beyond motherly instinct. This was something more. It was the bond of two beings who had fought together to survive. Lucas, who had remained close throughout their journey, was always there when Sierra needed him. He kept a watchful eye on Shadow, offering guidance and advice on how to best care for the foal. His quiet presence had become a comforting reassurance for Sierra, someone who understood the unspoken weight of what they had gone through. "Is he getting stronger?" Sierra would ask, her voice full of hope and worry in equal measure. Lucas would nod, a soft smile playing on his lips as he observed the foal's progress. "He's making great strides. He's a tough little one," and tough he was. Shadow's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. With every passing day, he grew more energetic, more playful. The foal's once fragile body was becoming more solid, his legs now firm enough to carry him across the field. The small steps he had taken weeks ago now turned into enthusiastic runs across the open meadow. He had a spark of life in him, a will to survive that Sierra had only dreamed of seeing. But it wasn't just the physical recovery that Sierra noticed. It was the emotional healing that was happening too. Shadow's trust in her was unwavering, and every time she looked into his eyes, she could see a silent understanding between them. He had been through hell and back, but he had found a way to push forward, just as Sierra had. Their journey had been a shared one, a bond forged in the fires of desperation, and now that bond was stronger than ever. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and bathed the meadow in soft golden light, Sierra and Lucas sat together, watching Shadow playfully prance around. The foal was kicking up his heels, full of energy and life, as if he were daring the world to stop him. Sierra laughed, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. "He's really coming into his own," Sierra said softly, her voice filled with pride. Lucas nodded, his gaze focused on the foal as he jumped and twirled in the field. "You've done a remarkable job. He's lucky to have you." Sierra smiled, but there was a humility in her expression. "I couldn't have done it without you. If it weren't for your help." Lucas cut her off, his eyes kind but firm. "You're stronger than you know, Sierra. You saved him just as much as I did." Sierra didn't respond immediately, her eyes lingering on Shadow. He was no longer the fragile foal she had carried through the storm, barely hanging on to life. He was a fighter now, full of vitality, his spirit as unbreakable as his body. And in many ways, Sierra realized that she had become a fighter too. The journey to save Shadow had also been a journey of self-discovery, one where she had learned her own strength and resilience. As the days turned into weeks, The foal's recovery seemed nothing short of miraculous. Shadow was not only surviving, he was thriving. His playful nature had returned in full force. Sierra often found herself laughing at his antics, the way he would chase after butterflies, leap over small rocks, and nuzzle at her side as if he were trying to tell her that everything was going to be okay. Every little victory, the first time he stood without wobbling, the first time he trotted across the meadow, the first time he made a full circle around her, felt like a victory for both of them. But there were still moments when Sierra couldn't help but think back to that dark, stormy night. She thought of the fear, the desperation, and the seemingly insurmountable odds they had faced together. There had been a time when it seemed impossible, a time when she had feared she would lose him. But now, looking at Shadow as he pranced around with unbridled joy, Sierra realized how far they had come. The bond between them had grown deeper, stronger. Shadow was more than just a foal. He had become a symbol of resilience, not just for Sierra, but for everyone who had witnessed his journey. His recovery wasn't just a physical one. It was a testament to the strength that could arise from the most difficult of circumstances. He had beaten the odds just as Sierra had. Sierra sat back on a patch of grass, watching Shadow as he galloped with abandon across the field. A deep sense of peace settled over her, knowing that the foal she had nearly lost was now a picture of health and vitality. In that moment, Sierra understood that the journey they had been on was far from over. They had reached a turning point, and now the only direction was forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sierra's heart swelled with gratitude. Shadow was her miracle, a living testament to the power of love, determination, and second chances. And no matter what the future held, she knew that they would face it together. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the meadow as Sierra stood by the fence, watching Shadow prance happily around the field. The little foal had grown strong, his once wobbly legs now sure and confident as he galloped through the grass, his mane flowing in the breeze. The transformation from the frightened, frail creature she had found in the storm to the vibrant, energetic foal before her was nothing short of a miracle. As the wind tugged at her hair, Sierra smiled softly, her heart full. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she could finally let go of the fear and embrace the future. Sierra had given everything to this foal, to saving him, to helping him recover, and in return, Shadow had given her more than she could have imagined. He had reminded her of the power of second chances, the strength that could come from even the most desperate situations. But now there was something else she needed to embrace. Freedom. She watched as Shadow sprinted across the meadow, his eyes shining with the pure joy of life. For Sierra, this was the start of something new. The road had been long and filled with challenges, but she had persevered. She had found her strength not only in saving Shadow but in saving herself, too. The journey they had shared had bonded them in ways that words couldn't capture. They had weathered the storm together, and now they were free to face the world ahead. Lucas, who had been there every step of the way, approached from behind, his presence as comforting as always. He had been more than just a friend to Sierra throughout this ordeal. He had become a guide, a partner in a journey that neither of them had expected. Together, they had witnessed the impossible. A foal who had been near death, now running across the field with the freedom he deserved. Sierra turned to Lucas, her eyes full of gratitude and unspoken emotions. "We did it," she said softly, her voice thick with the weight of all they had overcome. Lucas smiled, his eyes warm. "We did." For a moment, they stood together, both looking out over the meadow where Shadow continued to play, his energy boundless. The sounds of his joyful galloping filled the air, a testament to the life that had been given back to him. In that moment, Sierra knew that the foal she had rescued had, in turn, rescued her. She had come to the ranch to heal, to find solace from the hardships of her past. But it was Shadow who had helped her rediscover her sense of purpose, her strength, and the deep, unbreakable connection she shared with the animals she cared for. As the day wore on and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Sierra felt a sense of peace settle over her, a calm she hadn't known in a long time. She had faced the darkest of moments and had come through them stronger than ever before. Now, She stood on the edge of a new chapter, ready to embrace it with open arms. Sierra approached Shadow, who trotted over to her with a soft whinny. He nuzzled her gently, and she laughed, her heart light. She had saved him, yes, but in so many ways he had saved her too. She placed her hand gently on his neck, feeling the warmth of his coat beneath her fingertips. "We made it, didn't we, little one?" she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Shadow responded with a soft nicker, and Sierra couldn't help but smile through the tears that threatened to fall. She had come to this place broken, searching for answers, searching for meaning. And now, she stood here, healed and whole, with a foal who had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Lucas watched them from a distance, understanding the depth of the moment. This wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of something even greater. Sierra and Shadow had proven that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always light on the other side. Sierra looked over at Lucas, her expression resolute. "It's time," she said, her voice firm. "We're free now, and we're ready to face whatever comes next." With that, Sierra turned to Shadow and gave him a gentle pat on the back. "Let's go," she said, her words filled with promise. As they walked together, side by side, the world seemed full of possibilities. Sierra and Shadow were no longer bound by the past or by fear. They had fought for each other, and in doing so, they had unlocked the freedom to live a life of their own choosing. For the first time in a long while, Sierra felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just the woman who had rescued a foal. She was the woman who had found her own freedom. And Shadow, her steadfast companion, would be by her side every step of the way. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the meadow, Sierra knew that this was only the beginning. The world ahead was unknown, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it with hope in her heart and the foal who had given her the strength to move forward. The journey had been long, but now it was their time. Sierra and Shadow were no longer survivors, they were free, and the adventure ahead was theirs to take, together. As Sierra and Shadow stood at the edge of the meadow, gazing out at the endless horizon, a sense of peace enveloped them. Their journey was just beginning, and the world ahead was full of promise. The powerful bond they had formed was a testament to the transformative power of love, patience, and second chances. But their story isn't over. This is where you come in. Sierra and Shadow's incredible journey can inspire us all to embrace hope, to never give up, even when the odds seem impossible. Every story of resilience and redemption, no matter how small, holds the power to change lives. Just like Sierra didn't give up on Shadow, you can be that source of strength for someone in need. If you've been touched by Sierra and Shadow's story, or if you believe in the power of second chances, share their story. Pass it on to others who may need a reminder that miracles are possible. Whether it's rescuing an animal, helping a friend in need, or taking the first step toward your own personal transformation, you have the power to make a difference. Take action today. Follow their journey, spread their message of hope, and be part of the change. Remember, like Sierra and Shadow, there's always a chance for a new beginning, no matter what struggles you've faced. So ask yourself, what can you do today to bring more light into the world? Whether it's offering kindness, lending a helping hand, or simply sharing a story of hope, your actions can create ripples of change. Be the change. Be the hope. If you were inspired by this story, hit that like button, share with your friends, and comment below. What does hope mean to you? What does a second chance look like in your life? Let's start a conversation and keep the hope alive. Remember, you're never alone. And sometimes, the most unexpected heroes come into our lives when we need them the most. Let's make the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time.